It was the fall of 2018, and I just finished a long shift somewhere between Colorado and Kansas. I worked the late hours and was used to long, lonely nights, but that particular night, I decided to hitch a ride back home to save time. But little did I know, this was the worst decision of my life. The town was small and remote, and not many cars passed through that area late at night, but I didn't think much of it. I'd taken rides from truckers before, so when a rig rolled into the parking lot, I didn't think much of it. I took a chance. The trucker seemed normal enough. He was in his late 40s. We exchanged a few words, and when he told me he was heading in the direction of my town, I climbed up into the passenger seat. The rig smelled of gasoline and stale coffee. He told me he had to make a quick stop first at a rest area to check his load, and I didn't think twice about it. My house was only a couple hours away, and I was just grateful for the ride. We drove in silence for the first hour. I stared out the window. There was something eerie about how empty the highway felt. No other cars in sight. About an hour into the drive, he pulled into a rest stop. It was one of those old, forgotten stops that you only see late at night, a small parking lot with a couple of run-down bathrooms and a flickering streetlight. He parked near the back and told me he had to check something on the trailer. I offered to help, but he wanted me to stay in the truck. Again, I didn't argue. I watched him in the side mirror as he walked to the back of the trailer. Then I heard a noise, like metal scraping against metal. I looked out the window but couldn't see anything. The cab felt too quiet, too still. My gut told me something wasn't right. I waited, expecting him to reappear any second. But the seconds turned into minutes, and my unease grew. I was about to open the door when I heard a click. The truck's engine roared to life, but it wasn't him behind the wheel. A man I'd never seen before climbed into the driver's seat. His face was hidden by a cap. My blood turned to ice. He didn't say a word, just looked straight ahead and shifted the truck into gear. Panic rushed through me. I reached for the door handle, but before I could open it, I felt a sharp pain in my side. Another man had slid into the passenger seat, and I hadn't even noticed him. His knife was pressed against my ribs. "Don't move," he whispered. I froze. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Where was the original driver? Who were these men? The fear got at me, but the knife at my side kept me still. The truck drove forward, back onto the highway, but all I could focus on was the blade. The trucker, I couldn't even think of him as anything else, drove in silence for miles. There were no cars, no signs of life, just darkness. My mind kept screaming at me to do something, to run, to scream for help, but deep down I knew there was no help coming. The man with the knife was too close, and the driver, whoever he was just as dangerous. After what felt like hours, the truck turned off the main road, heading down a dirt path that led into the woods. My heart raced. I didn't know what they had planned for me, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. The woods were endless. There was no way I could run without getting caught. The truck stopped. The driver turned off the engine, and for a moment, everything was quiet. Then the man beside me grabbed my arm, yanking me out of the cab. I didn't have time to react before he shoved me towards the trees. "Walk," he ordered, and I obeyed, the knife still pressed against my back. We walked deeper into the woods. No birds, no wind, just silence. The deeper we went, the harder it was to breathe. My mind was racing, trying to figure out a way to escape, but every time I slowed down, the man jabbed the knife harder against my back. Finally, we stopped in a small clearing. The other man, the one who had been driving, appeared out of nowhere. He was carrying something. Rope. My stomach twisted into knots. I wanted to scream, to fight, but they were too strong. They tied my hands behind my back. The rough rope was cutting into my skin and forced me to my knees. I knew then that they didn't plan to let me go. Time seemed to blur as they circled me like vultures. They talked to each other, but I couldn't make out the words. My mind was too clouded with terror. I was sure they were going to kill me right there in the woods. The knife, the rope, the isolation. It all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. But then, something changed. I heard the sound of another truck in the distance. It was barely noticeable at first, but it grew louder. The men stiffened, exchanging glances. They hadn't expected anyone else out here. Before I could even process what was happening, they grabbed me again, dragging me back through the woods towards the truck. The noise of the approaching vehicle must have scared them, because they were moving faster now. I stumbled and fell, but they yanked me back to my feet. Their grip was bruising my arms. When we reached the truck, they threw me into the back of the trailer. The door slammed shut. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled against the ropes, but it was no use. I was trapped. Minutes passed. I could hear them outside, arguing in hushed voices. I didn't know what they were planning, but I knew I had to get out. My hands were raw from the rope, but I kept pulling, twisting, fighting against it. Every second felt like an eternity. Then out of nowhere, the door to the trailer swung open. I prepared myself for whatever was coming next, but instead, I saw headlights. The other truck had pulled into the clearing. A third man, dressed in a uniform that looked like some kind of truck service, stepped out. He didn't seem to notice me at first. His attention was focused on the two men. They were tense, standing too close together, clearly trying to hide something. The man in the uniform asked a few questions, something about their load, but their answers were short and defensive. I wanted to scream for help, but fear clamped my throat shut. One wrong move, and I knew they'd kill me right there. Then, the uniformed man stepped closer to the truck, peering inside. His flashlight beam landed on me, tied up and bloodied in the back. His eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw his hand twitch towards his radio. That's when all hell broke loose. The man with the knife lunged at him, but the uniformed guy was quicker. He dodged the attack, drawing something from his belt, a baton or maybe a gun. I couldn't tell in the chaos. The next few seconds were a blur of shouting, struggling, and the sound of metal against flesh. I scrambled backwards, trying to get as far away from the violence as possible. Somehow the uniformed man overpowered them. Maybe it was adrenaline, maybe it was luck, but he managed to knock one of them out cold while the other fled into the woods. He turned back to me, breathing hard, and pulled out a knife, not to hurt me, but to cut the ropes. The second I was free, I collapsed, sobbing, unable to believe I had survived. It was late August, 2018. I'd been driving long haul for nearly 7 years and thought I'd seen it all. Bad weather, worse drivers, even a few crazies. But nothing could have prepared me for what went down on that stretch of highway outside of Amarillo, Texas. I was running a route from Oklahoma City to Tucson, Arizona, with a full load of machine parts in the back of my rig. The first few hours passed like any other, grinding through miles, sipping coffee, flipping between radio stations. By sunset, I'd crossed into Texas, planning to stop at a rest area before pushing through the night. Around 10 p.m., the highway was mostly empty. A few trucks here and there, but pretty much an empty road. That's when I noticed a set of headlights in my side mirror, coming up fast. At first, I didn't think much of it. Cars passed all the time, especially at night when drivers tried to make up time. But these lights didn't pass me. They stayed right on my tail, maybe 10 feet from my trailer, which was unusual. Most drivers, especially truckers, kept a good distance. This car was different. I glanced in the mirror, trying to make out the vehicle, but all I could see was its headlights blinding me. I slowed down a little, hoping they'd pass. They didn't. The road was dark and straight, with no exits for another 20 miles, and this car was hugging my bumper like it had nowhere else to go. I clicked on my CB radio, broadcasting to anyone in range. "Anybody else see this jackass tailgating a rig near mile marker 114? Silence. No replies. I figured I'd let it go. People do stupid stuff on the road all the time, right? But something wasn't sitting right. The car wasn't just tailgating anymore. It was swerving slightly, jerking left and right, as if trying to decide whether to pass me or not. A pit formed in my stomach. Maybe it was drunk kids, or maybe something worse. Finally, I had enough. I eased off the gas, hoping they'd either pass me or back off. But when I slowed, they slowed. When I sped up, they sped up. This wasn't normal. My heartbeat picked up, and I could feel that something was wrong. After a few more minutes, the car suddenly jerked into the left lane, speeding up to pull alongside my truck. I got a glimpse of the vehicle. An old beat-up sedan, rust on the sides, its windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. It stayed there for a few seconds, driving parallel to my cab. I turned my head, trying to make out who was inside, but I couldn't see anything beyond the glass. Then, the car swerved sharply toward me, nearly clipping my trailer. I yanked the wheel right. The truck was shaking as I fought to keep control. My heart pounded in my chest. I slammed the horn, hoping to scare them off, but they didn't flinch. They just kept riding alongside, swerving toward me again and again. I was in a full-blown panic now. This wasn't some game or road rage. Whoever was in that car wanted something, maybe to run me off the road. I reached for my phone, dialing 911 with one hand while trying to keep the rig steady with the other. My hands were shaking so bad, I could barely hold the wheel. The dispatcher answered, "911, what's your emergency? I'm a trucker on Highway 287. Just outside Amarillo. I've got some car trying to run me off the road. It's been tailgating me for miles, and now it's swerving at me. I don't know what they want, but I need help." The operator asked for my location, and I rattled off the mile marker I'd passed a few minutes earlier. She told me to keep driving, and that she'd send a patrol car to intercept me. I stayed on the line, but my eyes were glued to the sedan. It had dropped back again, staying just out of view. Every second felt like an hour. My knuckles were white from gripping the wheel. I could feel my heart in my throat. The highway was endless in front of me. No exits, no towns, just me and that car. That's when it hit me. They weren't trying to scare me. They were trying to stop me. Maybe hijack the rig. Maybe worse. The car sped up again, pulling alongside. This time the passenger window rolled down, and I caught a glimpse of a man's face, just for a second. Then I saw the gun, a black handgun pointing right at my window. Without thinking, I slammed on the brakes. The car shot past me, but they weren't done. They swerved in front of the truck, trying to block me. My mind was racing. I needed to stay moving, needed to get out of there. I stepped on the gas, swerving around them just as they slammed on their brakes, nearly causing me to jackknife. My trailer swung wide, but I managed to keep it on the road. My whole body was shaking, but I couldn't stop. Not now, not with them right behind me. I could hear the operator on the phone asking if I was okay, but I could barely focus on her words. The sedan was gaining on me again. Then it happened, a deafening bang. The windshield cracked, a bullet hole right in the center. They'd fired at me. They were trying to kill me. I floored it, pushing the rig harder than I ever had before. The truck roared as it surged forward, but the sedan was still there, right on my tail. My eyes darted between the road and the mirror. How far was that patrol car? I needed help. Now suddenly, I saw lights in the distance, red and blue. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. The sedan must have seen the cops too. They slammed on their brakes and swerved off the road, disappearing into the desert scrub, leaving me alone on the highway. My heart was pounding and hands shaking uncontrollably. The patrol car pulled up alongside me, and I slowed to a stop, my entire body shaking with adrenaline and fear. 2 officers jumped out, guns drawn, scanning the darkness for the car, but it was long gone. One of the officers approached my cab, motioning for me to roll down the window. "Are you all right?" he asked, his flashlight shining into the cab. I nodded, still too shaken to speak. My mouth was dry. I handed over my license and explained what had happened, my voice barely above a whisper. The officer listened, nodding as he took notes. They knew this stretch of highway well. I wasn't the first trucker to report being harassed by a car, but a gunshot? That was new. After checking my rig for any more damage, they advised me to head to the nearest rest stop and wait for the all clear. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have a story yourself, you can write it to me through email. You can find it in the description of the video.